Hi everyone, so for our video today, we'll be talking about these brushes that I got from Fude Bobo. I ordered these three from her, and these two brushes I got via PR, and I would like to give a huge thank you to Fude Bobo for sending these my way. I am truly grateful. Now, before heading to the brush festival this year, I actually placed an order on her website for these three brushes because I have been very intrigued by them. And after placing it, I actually messaged her via DM on Instagram, and I said, Fude Bobo, is it possible for me to pick up my order from you at the brush festival this year? Because I already knew beforehand that she was going, and she said yes. So she was actually surprised to know that I was going because for all the time that we've been messaging each other, things like that, she asked me a few months ago if I was going to the brush festival this year, and I told her early on that I might not be able to go to the festival this year because my partner and I were actually initially planning of going to Europe for our anniversary, but that kind of fell out because of some work commitments, and that's why when my schedule suddenly got free for the month of September, I quickly hopped on to a plane and headed to Hiroshima to celebrate brushes at the festival. So if you're actually interested to see about my adventures in the brush festival this year, link is down on the description box, okay? Alright, so for our video today, we'll be talking about these brushes individually, and of course, there will be a demo to see how these brushes are gonna work for us today, alright? Okay, so let's start off with these two brushes first. So these are the Kakishibuzome five-sided brushes. One is in a size small and the other one is in a size large. So I was actually very intrigued when I first saw this in pictures because the shape of the brush head, to me anyway, was very new. This was actually the first time I saw a brush head design like this, and I was very intrigued on how they will work and how they will perform. And being that both of the bristles of these brushes are dyed using persimmon tannins, this actually makes these two brushes very versatile, wherein you can use this for a variety of formulations: powder, liquids, gel, creams, anything that's under the sun. And I love it because a versatile brush or a multi-use brush will always have a place in my brush kit. Now, the handles of these two brushes look absolutely gorgeous. Look at that. It looks so luxe, I have to say. And of course, we still have that very particular handle color here from the Yoshiki line, wherein you have black ferrules here, and the color actually fades into the red here towards the base of the handle. Then you have a flat base here, so you can actually make this stand on the table, but just to be careful because even if both of these brushes are actually well balanced, the weight is distributed evenly across the entire brush, as you guys can see here. But when you make it stand, the brush heads are actually quite top heavy, so it's prone to toppling. The ferrules here are crimped here very close to the top of the ferrule, and I believe this is what gives the brush head this shape. And I find it so amazing on how they come up with a design like this, because it's a very novel brush head design to me. Super. Look at that. And just seeing the crimp here, this must be a very special crimping machine to make this. Very interesting. And I'm so very interested with the brush shape of this, and I'll just try to see later on how well it will actually work for my makeup sentiments, things like that, and how well it will apply and blend out product. But now that I'm brushing the brush here onto my skin, both of these brushes feel very silky and very smooth. And despite on how big and how full the belly is of this large size five-sided brush here, it actually feels very soft, and it actually sprays out quite nicely. It doesn't exert any pressure, but as I play with it here on my face, I could actually feel it doesn't have too much resiliency in the belly of it, which is actually great, because if this brush was any stronger in the belly, I think it would make cause streaking to appear on the skin. And I have also noticed that as I start to just play with the brush head here on my face, it kind of adapts into the natural curvature of my face, because if I lift the brush, this is what we will see. So it ends up being at an angle just a little bit. So maybe like, the bristles at this portion here is what you'll use to blend out like, product. And the bristles here at the top is what you'd use to add more coverage, like maybe in a stamping motion. And I can also say that's the same for the small brush here. This will definitely be a good brush to use for concealer application. And for sure, we can also use this for like, contouring and maybe for some highlighting. So like, we'll see how these brushes will work with us later today. Okay, right, so let's apply some like, foundation and maybe concealer because like, I'm very, very excited to try this. So let me just get some products. All right, now for my foundation today, I actually pulled out my MAC Full Coverage, like, palette here. And I am gonna be using like a mix of two shades, like NC35 and C40. And we will see how this big brush will actually like, apply and deliver cream foundation. My first initial reaction to this brush is that it actually picks up like, product very well. And when it first landed on my skin, I thought like, oh, it added way too much. But as soon as I like, started blending out the product using the brush, I actually like, have this very nice even like, layer all over my skin. And the size of this brush head is actually like, big enough to apply products like these in no time. Look at that, very nice, very comfortable to use on the face. Now, I initially thought that it was similar in like, the way it performs to that of the Sonia G jumbo base like this. So if we put them side by side here, look, see, they're almost the same, but the Sonia G here is actually like, shorter. They bloom almost to the same like, width, especially here at the base, but they just have very different brush head designs. Although I do have to say, based on my observation earlier, that as soon as I start like, playing with the brush head here, it kind of like almost ends up being at an angle the same way that the jumbo base from Sonia G like, is designed to be. But I do have to say that the main difference between these two brushes is actually like, the bristle type, wherein like, because of course the bristles on this brush here is actually longer, so it's actually softer and airier at the tips here than in comparison to this. But like, there's a certain portion of this brush wherein if it reaches like, somewhere in the middle here, that's where you'll get its like, strength. And basing off of just like, pressing it here, it's almost quite similar to that of Sonia G's jumbo base, but this one just has a stronger core. But this is actually like, a bad comparison because the Sonia G jumbo base uses like, a mix of natural and synthetic fiber, so that's why their personalities are actually very, very different. But this one, I do have to say, is actually very soft, very easy to handle, blends out amazingly well. And for sure, if you want more coverage in a certain area, you can just like, pick up product using the top of the brush head here, and then you can just like, use it in a tapping motion. Look at that, I can already see the coverage building because the color is intensifying just a little bit. Okay, right, not bad at all, lovely. So let me just blend this out a little bit and buff it up. Okay, now I'm gonna try the smaller version, and I was initially thinking of using this for like, concealer application, but I decided not to do it last minute because I am actually very interested in using this brush for that. So instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this for like, maybe contouring, because I saw Fude Bobo do this when she was presenting this brush to the market. So I have here my Rare Beauty Solace Liquid Contour. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this, which I've already placed here on my palette. Really load the brush tip of this and just tap it right on top of my, like, cheekbone. And wow, it does actually apply, like, the product precisely. Also quite, like, intense with, like, the lay down of the pigment. I'm just, like, I'm blending the contouring product upward and also tapping it at the same time. And as I am nearing the, like, end of my cheekbone here, I'm, like, being very light-handed with it, just so that I don't get a very thick line in that area. Now I'm just gonna buff that and blend it some more. So it also actually does the job of really, like, blending out product really well. And I'm actually quite surprised at that. Look at how, like, emphasized this contour is. So I'm just gonna get the big brush now, and I'm just gonna pat it on top just so that it blends out. Okay, fantastic. Nice pairing these two brushes are. And let me do that here on the other side. And maybe just a little here under my chin, because I have noticed recently that, like, the sands of time have changed. So we just need to create some shadowing in areas where, like, gravity is doing its job. And for me, I've actually noticed that, like, it's this portion just under my chin. Here on the side, I don't have a problem, but here in this area, I can see that, like, it's already drooping just a little bit. This brush really helps you to be, like, detailed with your application, but it also enables you to apply it in a much more bigger real estate in no time. But then again, I'm very, like, targeted with my application. That's why this brush head works. So if you have a much more bigger real estate than I do, this might also work for you, especially when you're rushing. And what I want to do now is I want to apply some gel bronzer. So let me go get that. Okay, so I have my Chanel Le Beige here at the back of my hand, and with the large brush here, I'm just gonna pick that up. And I'm just gonna apply it here on top of my cheekbones to blend that into the contour. Fantastic. And then here on the other side, just to add some warmth all over. And this brush also does the job amazingly well of, like, really applying it and blending it out. Absolutely gorgeous. Love it. Love the blending. Love how everything is turning out. Very nice. And let me buff this into a microfiber towel. Then pick up just a little bit more of the foundation that I used earlier, and just, like, tap it here on the edges to blend out, like, the bronzer. Okay. Love that. Gorgeous. Beautiful. All right, so that's how these two brushes worked with me this morning. I love it. Loving it so far. All right, and the next brush that we have here is this 3D eyeshadow brush, also from Yoshiki by Koyudo. Now, the brush head here is at an angle, and it also uses the Kakishibuzome dyeing technique. And, like, as you guys can see here, you don't really get an overall dye on all of the bristles. Look at that, because you get that here for the entire brush head. But with here, especially here at the back portion, only the tips are dyed, while here in the front, they're actually almost really dyed close to the base. So maybe there's a reason behind that, because after all, this is where you'll need so much power for this brush to actually, like, work. Of course, you have to pick up more product here. This is the portion of the brush that will, like, lay the product on the face or on the eyes. So that's why maybe it's dyed this way. Now the brush head is actually quite soft, amazingly soft, and I actually love brush heads like this because it reminds me of, like, our fingertip. And I also have one other brush here. This is also from Yoshiki by Koyudo, and it's actually this one. Now this one is made of undyed goat hair, and it's almost at an angle as well, but it's very different from the 3D one that I have here. It's fluffier and airier, and it's more angular. And I've actually been using this brush to really apply concealer because I just really love how the shape is designed and how it fits extremely well. And I was really wishing that a brush like this will come out, but it would have this dyed persimmon tannins, because I just really love how these tannins just has a way of adding strength into the brush head, and they also have a nice way of really blending out the color and buffing it out, especially in concealer products, because as I said earlier, they don't really suck up too much of the product, and it also delivers optimum impact of pigment on the face. Okay, now let's try this. So I am just tapping this NARS Soft Matte Concealer in Tiramisu here in my under eye area, and it applied and blended it out in no time. Very nice. Okay, the brush head is actually very soft, no prickling sensation, delivers pigment very well, and it also buffs out pigment very well. Alright, and now let's move on to the Nebulae series from Fude Bobo. I'm so excited, and I'm going to be talking about the CH2 first. So this is the one that has bristles made of a mix of black and silver fox hair, and this is my first mix of this bristle type ever, and it actually looks absolutely gorgeous. Nice snap back into position. Very nice shape. It is rounded, and I absolutely love rounded brush heads because they just have a way of really applying and blending out color. And now that I'm tapping the brush head here on my cheeks, I can actually feel that it's actually quite strong in the middle of the brush, here, really in the core of it. So you can actually use this brush for let's say very hard pressed powders, maybe finishing powders, and for sure you can use this to buff out setting powders, things like that, because it just really would work for you. And if you're someone like me who has oily skin, this is actually the best option for you to have, because fox hair just really has a way of not absorbing your oils. And if you're someone also who uses a lot of cream products, this is also a nice bristle type to use because it won't absorb a lot of the oils from the product that you would lay on your face. Now, in terms of comparison, I don't really have any brush that I can compare this with because I don't have other brushes here with a bristle mix like the CH2 here. But in terms of overall shape of the brush head here, it's actually quite similar to the soft cheek of Sonia G. The length of both brushes are actually almost the same. Look at that. Even the rounded design, they're almost the same, but they're just a difference in the fullness of both of these brushes. See, I'm sure you can see that. You have more fibers in the brush head of the CH2 here than that of the soft cheek brush here. But then again, the soft cheek is just used for cheek products, and because we have more fibers on the brush head here, you have more strength. You can use this for also loose powder application, or loose blush powders, mineral powders, finishing powders, things like that, because you have so much strength in this. And I'm actually very interested to see how this will pick up those type of products. Look at that. And of course, because the shape of this is quite intact, it doesn't bloom out much at the tips here, so it actually gives you the ability to be targeted with your application. So that's actually very interesting. And I also kind of love that it's very different in brush head design in comparison to the CH1. Of course, the bristle types are also very different, but they absolutely work together. Can you imagine? For this one, I use this for bronzer application sometimes, finishing powders, things like that. And to have this is a nice addition into the Nebulae series of Fude Bobo and Chikuhodo, because at least they try to complement each other. Okay, all right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply some loose powder first. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this Laura Mercier loose setting powder. Oh wow, so this is how much this brush head picks up. So let me just remove any excess here on the cap. And then let me just like, tap it here. So it's just like, a little bit too big for like the under eye area, but it still also does the job extremely well. Look at how well the brush head here actually like, delivers the powder. Ooh, nice coverage too. And I kind of love that I'm using this brush right now because after all, I used a ton of like, cream products on my face. And when you're using a brush that doesn't have so much strength and you're using cream powders under, you would find that sometimes it's a little bit difficult to deliver the powder to set the cream products, and you would really have to work at it. But like, after doing this, even if the brush head is actually very small, it really did kind of work of really applying and like, helping me set the foundation. Love that. I was actually so surprised that even for the size of this brush head, it was actually able to do the job. Okay, so let me just buff the powder out, remove any excess. And despite on like, the sensation of how like, strong the bristles of these brushes are, especially in the core, it actually has a very nice bounce. So it actually did not affect like, the foundation nor the products that I applied under earlier. No streaking whatsoever. Okay, so I just have a disrespectful blemish here, so let me just cover that up. So let me go get like, a pencil. Hang on. Okay, so I have here my Lisa Eldridge Pinpoint Concealer. So this was actually in my vanity in my bathroom. So I'm just gonna tap on a little bit of this just to cover the darkness just a little bit. And then with the brush that I used earlier for my contour, pick up whatever like, is left of the foundation here in the palette, and I'm just gonna tap that over to try to blend that out. Then I'm just gonna buff that out. Okay, and let me just set that with some powder. Now, also one thing by the way, when you are using like, silver fox hair and you have a little bit of some blemish and you're like, applying concealer on top of that, just be very careful when like, you're using the brush over the area, because like, these fox hairs are actually quite, resilient and strong, that they can actually flick out like, product. So if you find that you have areas of your face where you need to have more coverage in terms of product, and then you need to like, run like, fox hair over it, like, just take it lightly, just so that you won't have to repeat the makeup process again. Okay, so now let's play with some finishing powders, and I have here my most favorite Hourglass palette. As you guys can see, you have like, finishing powders here, highlighting powders, and then you have bronzer powders here. I really wish like, Hourglass would bring this back because it is such a good palette. Anyway, so let's try and use this finishing powder first. And I love the brush head size of this because it just fits very nicely into the pan, picks up a good amount of product. And let me just use it to add maybe like, some finishing powder here in this area, just to add like, brightness and luminosity. But I'm very careful with how much product I pick up, because as I've been saying before, if you overdo your finishing powders or highlighting powders, it can look cakey in no time. And then now let's proceed and use this finishing powder here. So this one has a peachier tone to it. So this is the one that's called Dim Light, and this is the one that's called Soft Light, if I am correct. Oh yeah, that's correct. So I'm just gonna buff the rest of my face with dim light. That would just also add a nice hint of like warmth. Okay, so I'm going to be careful on this cheek because of the blemish. I'm going to tap over it instead, and then I'm just going to buff the color in the rest of my face, and also a little bit here. And I also kind of love the fact that the Nebulae series of Fude Bobo, she actually has different bristles mixed into her brushes. So you have silver fox and black fox on this brush, and then you have, let's say, a Chikuhodo and blue squirrel on the CH1, and then on some of her other brushes you have weasel, and then some you have weasel, and I forgot which squirrel was this. So it's very interesting. And if you're someone who's new to the world of food, and then you're interested to try out different types of bristles, and to see which one works for you and your makeup sentiments or even your budget, checking out the Nebulae series of Fude Bobo is actually a great idea because it will just really help you, and it's not so confusing because it's all in one line. Because unlike other brands, they only have one line for a specific brush type and then another line for a specific brush type. So it can get a little bit confusing, and it can be frustrating as well because you kind of don't know what to choose because there's just so much options. But with the Nebulae series of Fude Bobo, you already have a mix of everything, and I believe that's great, super great. All right, so this is how the CH2 delivers finishing powders on the face. I am actually surprised that it did the job well because I was just thinking it's just the brush head is very small, very compact, and very bundled together, that I would think this would be much more better to be used for blush application. But after I've done this, I've seen that it actually does adjust itself very well, and I kind of love that. Right, so let's go on to blush, and I would like to use this blush from the Universe palette from a long time ago. This is one of my most favorite blush colors from Hourglass, and I'm just gonna pick up a little. Is this a little? I think this is a lot. So I should listen to my own advice, wherein I should be careful on how much product I pick up using this brush. And I'm just gonna tap this here on my cheek. Okay, and let me pick up some more just to intensify the color. Okay, I also love how this brush, as you tap it with the pigment, it also blends it out at the same time, because that's what I love about rounded brush heads here. It really just has the job of laying the product in a specific portion of the face, and then the outer bristles are the one that blends it out, creating a nice soft look already, especially if you just tap it on your cheeks. And maybe just as a finishing touch, I'm gonna get the CH1, and I'm gonna get a little bit of this Charlotte Tilbury bronzer here just to add more warmth. And I'm just gonna brush that all over my forehead area, and also just a little bit here just to blend everything. And for the final brush for our vlog today, we have the SO3 here from Fude Bobo, also part of the Nebulae series. So this one is the updated version because the brush head here is actually smaller and the design is round and flat. So it's a very traditional design because the original SO3 is actually this one here right beside it. So it's actually quite big and it fans out a little bit, flares out a little bit, especially here at the tips. And in terms of softness, the new SO3 is softer in comparison to the original one, because maybe they might have realized that you don't really need a very big brush to be effective. And also looking at both of these brushes now, I would really understand why they opted to update the SO3, because with a brush head like this, it's a much more universal type of brush head wherein you can use it to apply product all over the eyelid or be very specific with it. And because the bristles are made using a mix of Chikuhodo and gray squirrel, it can be very versatile. It's not too soft, and the Chikuhodo will give it enough buffing ability. Now with the original SO3, what I would use this for usually is just to buff out the edges and to soften out the edges. So I'm kind of glad for this update because you can actually really use it to apply and lay down eyeshadow products on the eyelids. So let's try that now, okay? Okay, so I'm thinking of creating a one and done eyeshadow look using this brush here, and I'm quite interested in using my favorite violet shade from Laura Mercier. This is called African Violet, and I'm just gonna tap the brush head here on top of this. So the formulation of this eyeshadow is a luster kind of a formula, and look how beautiful that color is. And I kind of like on how well this brush head actually applies this all over my, like, eyelid. It fits my eyelid very well. And because of the shape of this, like, the tips here, especially if you load, like, the product this way, so you have color now on the tips. So when you lay it here on your eyelid and you just brush it along, the outer tips here will already add definition into the socket line area. And that in itself will actually, like, minimize your eyeshadow application time. And then what you can do, like, is just you can put the brush at an angle here in an upward motion. You just buff out and blend out the eyeshadow. And that's it. Very nice and very beautiful and very easy. Okay, first I'm gonna tap it again and then load the tips again of the brush head and then lay it down, then anchor it into the socket line and then put the brush at an angle and then start blending out the edges, and you have a very nice one and done eyeshadow look. And with some mascara, it actually completes it. So don't forget to curl your lashes if you need to, okay? Alright, and just like that, I believe our demo is finished today, and I am so happy on how all of these brushes worked with me today. And it's actually quite a surprise on how well these two, like, square face brushes work extremely well. I was not expecting it, and this will be, like, an integral part of my brush kit right now. And of course, like, I absolutely love how this brush applied concealer, because truthfully I have been looking for a brush like this for quite some time, because I absolutely love on how, like, brushes that are dyed using persimmon tannins, like, just really have a way of, like, working in product into the skin, especially, like, that I've played with, like, bigger versions, like from either from Koyudo or from Sonia G, and I'm so glad that I found this because I just absolutely love it, super love it. And I also love the updated version of the SO3. I think it's more practical and it's more useful. It's very easy to use and handle. Just look at that, like, and it just has a way of just, like, really minimizing, like, your application of eyeshadow. And I think this is best to use for one and done eyeshadow looks. Right? And of course, the CH2 here, very beautiful brush, fantastic. I was blown away on how, like, it worked extremely well with me today. Super. I can't wait to play around with this some more. All right. Okay, so that's it for me today. So I hope that you guys enjoyed me showing you how I used all these brushes. So if you have any more questions or suggestions, please let me know down in the comments box and let's talk about it, because it's also very important for me to learn something from you. So if you have any of these brushes in your collection, please let me know what you use it for, with what products you use it with, and maybe I could also try and play with it the same way that you do. All right. Okay, so that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you're having a good day wherever you are. Bye.